I picked this game up after seeing it mentioned on another website. It's a pixel 2D anime-ish fantasy JRPG game made by Distant Alliance in the RPG Maker engine. As some may have seen from my text post last week, I expected this to be a shorter game, but it turned out to be much deeper than I originally thought, which should explain the runtime of this review. It's a very unassuming game from the title and the Steam page, but there is a fair volume to it. The first issue I noticed straight away was the game window. The game window loaded in an aspect ratio where no side of the window was longer than 6 centimeters, and there is absolutely no way to change this. There's no settings in the menu and there's no way to maximise the window, so my entire game experience looks like this. Never before have I had to play a game through a microscope, but alas, this hobby provides me with many surprises. It also means you'll have to suffer black bars whilst watching the footage. Starting the game takes you into a cutscene of sorts, with your pixel characters in a courtroom and some text at the bottom for the dialogue next to an image of the speaking character. It's noticeable quite early that there are typos in the game, and these persist quite a lot through the text. Your character, Alexander Virgilian de Granier, is being trialled and sentenced to jail, but he's not down for that, and a drawn sequence kicks in where he beats his way out the courtroom. The backgrounds appear painted, with the anime characters drawn in a slightly sharper style, and there's a bit of animation to seal the sequence. Alex meets up with a pink-haired girl called Maya outside, and as the guards make chase, you enter your first combat tutorial. The game focuses on turn-based combat like a lot of JRPGs, so you use the arrow keys to select from options between fighting, using abilities, defending, and using items from your bag, and you press enter to confirm. The controls are obviously pretty simple, and I had a look through the options. Your item bag has a mix of usable and unusable items with descriptions for each of them as you scroll through. Maya initially doesn't have any abilities, but Alex has a fireball option or a stash option. The fight isn't too bad, and once you're out, you're urged to escape into a nearby city. This then told me the other controls for outside of combat. Arrow keys to move, shift to run, escape for the menu and to save, and enter to interact. In the escape menu there are 6 options that aren't explained, so I had to click on stuff to figure it out. The items are denoted by symbols, and the bag at the top lets you see the items you have as a whole. Then it sorts it into weapons, loadout, and key, which presumably means key items. The fist icon lets you see your character's skills and use them outside of combat, such as healing abilities. The crossed swords are your character's weapon and armour loadouts, and their stats as a result. Then the question mark beneath it is a total stat overview of the character, and shows you how much XP they need to level up. The feather is the save option, of which there are 4 slots, and the Windows icon at the bottom was to quit. Browsing this window provided some explanation to the multiple typos. The game is originally Russian, or so I believe. You will see Russian text interspersed with the English text in places, and also places where English text seems overlaid to try and correct it. Generally though, you can understand what it all means. Once I was done with that, I tried my escape, but I realised the game also had stuff in common with Pokemon because I was leapt out on by invisible guards at random intervals and thrust into battle suddenly. This, added in with the fact I got lost, meant that I ended up fighting many times as I tried to figure out where to go and worrying that I was going to die without having made it anywhere. Finally though, I found a well which was quite hard to spot because of the tree cover, and jumped down to escape. I'm going to go through the story first of the game for context before I break down some of the mechanics involved. Once you go down the well, you have to make your way through a mine, but at the end of the mine you get challenged by an abyssal spawn. This mega monster is hard work to fight, but your characters seem to be familiar with what it is, though they don't much elaborate. Once you beat it, you get out into the woods, where you beat up some wolves and get towards the town. Despite being a criminal, when you get to the town, the guards let you in, and you immediately meet a woman who seems to know who you are. This woman's name is Claire, and she and Maya greet each other excitedly before she breaks the unfortunate news that Catherine, a woman they know well, has died. The shock and awe from this hits both Maya and Alex, with Maya running off and Alex wanting an explanation. You're told that somebody stabbed her, but nobody understands how, since she was something called a Sifu, a kind of elite warrior. Catherine was apparently like a mother to your characters, and so you go after Maya to see if she's okay. There's a discussion about finding a him and bringing him back, but there's no clarification on this. To cope, Alex gets drunk in the Groggy Cat Tavern and somehow finds himself a job offered by a scarred man in a suit, who puts 3,000 coins on the line if Alex kills a pack of wolves that have been terrorising people in the town, stopping trade and halting travellers as a result of the danger. You wake up the next morning and tell Maya, and you also get a free cloak off the shopkeep to cover yourself from the wanted posters, even though the guards let you into the town without a single issue. The man who hired you for the job to kill the wolves hangs about at the top of the town until you're ready. If you go around and speak to the citizens of the town about the wolves and try to figure out where the source of the attacks might be, you learn that they were fine for a while and would ignore people, but they seem to be excessively aggressive and bloodthirsty, attacking anything that gets nearby. There were also hints of a bigger creature having moved into the area, and people suspected that the wolves were attacking humans due to this other thing hunting their usual prey and them being hungry enough to try. The other theory was that the woodcutters going after the trees to expand the city had opened up dens and drawn out the wolves. Either way, whatever is out there manages to slaughter a full contingent of guards sent out to get rid of it. The man, Albert, accompanies you through the woods as you slash wolves and work your way towards the site of a massacre. And when you get there, you have a short time to peruse the crime scene before a cutscene kicks in and the perpetrator is revealed. A werewolf. On beating the werewolf, it holds a surprise. It's actually a woman called Dana, a member of an organisation called the Holy Inquisition. She is a member of their prime squad whose job is to kill inhumans. Werewolves, centaurs, gremlins, ghouls, dryads and winged folk. All of these people can be killed on sight by members of the squad, and she was a captain who would hunt her own kin. This enters a bit of lore exposition explaining the reasoning behind some of the group's powers. Alex's fire magic comes from a demon that lives inside him, known as the Spirit of Fury. This would usually be destructive, but Maya is supposedly a demon tamer, which explains why they travel and fight together and why Alex hasn't been taken over by the spirit yet. Dana has a spirit too, but has the spirit of the beast. Maya, Albert and Alex debate the morality of Dana's actions, but they decide to let her live and to join them. Maya and Alex are looking to travel to the mountains up north, and they realise they need a wind chart, as Albert also offers to stay with the group and he says he knows how they can get there and tells them that they need the chart. On getting back to the town, they realise there's a guy who's been jailed and sentenced to death who has a wind chart. For this portion, Alex just lurks around the town, perhaps to not get caught by the jailer, and Maya leads the investigation along with Albert and Dana. Dana has the ability to tell if people are lying or not with her beast sensors, and when you speak to him he says he's innocent, but Dana says there's more to it. You go through and investigate to find the murder weapon and some clues about 3 apparent people that the guy in jail met with who might have something to do with it. On finding a note about a meeting, you go to see a dude who you somehow know is called Dexter despite never meeting him or seeing it anywhere, and he tells you can get the wind chart off a guy at the south of town, as the jailed man actually sold it off to him and was pretending to still have it so you would get him out of jail. Alex rejoins you here and you sneak in and frisk the house to find the wind chart. Once you have it, you recruit Claire to fly the airship, since none of the rest of you know how to do it. At the start of the journey you get more lore around a campfire. Maya's parents were magicians that died in an elemental war and she joined a guild to work. On a job to deal with a thief, she and a man named Charlie met Alex, who turned out to be the thief, and instead of handing him in, decided to hire him. Alex found an artifact called the Ring of Ignis and let it control him, and it nearly took over, which is when Maya found out she was a demon tamer. Alex taps into its power, but it stays dormant because of her. You also get the explanation for your journey at this point. There's a necromancer named Nelict who has a bounty on his head. One day he vanished and Maya and Claire's foster father disappeared as well. Maya and Alex are hunting him to get Charlie, the foster father, back. but they got caught by the guard, and though Maya slipped away, Alex got arrested, which explains the trial at the start of the game. They try to probe Dana, but she resists. Albert leads you through a cave in some cliffs to a huge airship. You break into a hut to get the key for the ship, but emerge into a confrontation. Dana's old squad from the Holy Inquisition have caught up to her to kill her, and you resist them despite knowing that they're elite fighters. For the sake of plot, you get your ass handed to you, and as a result, Albert gets shot in the head. This was initially a shock for me, but he starts getting up again, and it turns out that Albert is a Reaper, a golem that was made to kill and is pretty much indestructible. He survives the fatal wound and the enemies leave, and he says he can sleep off his wound in the cabin. Albert has been around for a very long time, but he can't remember his past, and seems to have been reanimated at some point recently, though he doesn't know who by. He doesn't even know if Albert is his real name. Alex frisks the ship for items and instead finds a little elf child called Rory who ran away from an orphanage and has been living in the ship whilst it's been abandoned. She also apparently has a pet climber called Nicholas that you never see. On your journey you have to stop off for fuel, which you do in the wastelands for some reason, and the most non-threatening members of the gang go out, Maya and Rory. However, a snag is hit when hours later they don't return. The rest of the gang goes to find them and find a huge mansion and Rory, who yells about a ghost in the building from a piano playing itself, and then runs off. Maya is gone, and they find it suspicious that there's a building with lights and electricity in the middle of the desert. Going into the house, it has fresh food and lit fireplaces, but no one to be seen. There is a piano playing on its own, but Albert spots cables going into the floor, and a secret ladder reveals a metallic bunker-esque area. Everything is shut off, so you descend down to the bottom and find nothing but an automated screen. Albert says this is the work of the ancients, made a long time ago, and the computer tells you have to register for citizenship to ask about Maya. You try to register but need a medical check, which you do manually, and then try to see the legal bot, but it fails and you have to get a new power source. There's a basement area full of robots that I thought you had to sneak through, then I just walked past the robots and nothing happened. Then it turns out if you run into them, you have to fight them, and they are pretty strong. After getting the power source and putting it into the generator, you then sign up and ask about Maya. The computer lets you into a side room where you find Maya knocked out and have to fight a giant robot. After winning, you meet some form of AI that Albert recognises and it recognises him, so it answers his questions about the place, however it doesn't remember its original creators due to an interrupt in its memory. Albert wonders if it could have some hints to his past. You leave the mansion with the fuel the AI gives you, and you finally make it to the mountain, making Claire begrudgingly wait in the airship, and though you get challenged by a guy, he lets you into the village and leaves you to it. There are a lot of Inhumans there, but from that village you carry on toward the castle where Nelict should be. To get there you have to go into a maze and work your way towards him. You cutscene back to the Inquisitors that attacked you, and their exposition explains what's special about Alex's power. He has the ability to use different magical elements, which is something usually people have to train for their whole life. Magic can be combined, and a magician's creativity can make them more powerful. But during their chat, the town is attacked by something. You then cut back to the maze and have to solve a series of puzzles in the area to work your way to getting face to face with Nelict. You have to light 2 lanterns in a tick-tocking room to get through a locked door, and when you manage that you end up in the warp zone, trapped in a more distorting room until you get confronted by the flesh lizard. Once you beat the flesh lizard, you finally manage to come face to face with 2 men. One man is Charlie, the guy who was your foster father and who went missing, who confronts you and asks why you came when you knew it was a trap. Nelict is the blue-haired guy next to him, and he taunts Dana, who recognises him instantly despite the fact he's in a different body. Alex challenges him, and as he gloats you find out that Catherine did die, and she was killed by Charlie. When Charlie went to kill Nelict and he disappeared, it was because Nelict almost killed him, but Charlie had a crisis before death, and when Nelict pulled him back from the brink, Charlie's fear of death made him agree loyalty to Nelict in exchange for protection. And so, when Catherine came along to try and save Charlie and kill Nelict, Nelict, with his dramatic flair, enjoyed the idea of making Charlie kill Catherine. and he did it. Nelix decides he's too cool to fight you and teleports away, leaving you faced with Charlie. Alex gets mad and the demon talks to him and tempts him, and then you see a huge explosion, and that's the game. Whew. You understand why this game is so big now, right? The story of the game is quite variable as it goes through, and some parts of the plot seem to be not unnecessary, but a little rogue. One thing this game does do is leave some open ends for continuity. For example, you don't learn much about Claire, you don't find out much about Rory and why she was an orphan, and of course you don't really know who Albert is or where he came from, and neither does he. You get a bit of Dana's story from her youth, and that she was in the Holy Inquisition early, and that her werewolf ability was picked up partway through her killing. Maya and Alex you know the most about, but of course their story to defeat Nelix isn't closed down at the end of the game. The only thing you uncover is how Catherine died. But you never actually meet Catherine even in a flashback, and your only connection to her is going off what the characters say. Basically, you get cliffhangered, and obviously the whole source of the AI machine mansion is not explained either. This actually isn't that bad though, and the way the information about the characters is drip-fed through the story keeps you curious about what's going on. You don't actually find out what your purpose in the game is past running from the law until you're leaving the city, but that's at least a couple of hours into the game. The connection back to where the game started is nice later on as well, and it explains the rather intense start to the whole story. But that high-pressure beginning to the story about running from guards really helps to capture your interest straight away and carry you into what's happening. The other thing that really helps sell the story is investment in the characters, and despite the literal spelling mistakes, the characters and story are written really well, as is the surrounding content of the game and the entire immersion of the universe. The story I described is essentially the main plot, but there are side quests within the plot that you can do, and extra bits of information you can find out about places by chatting to people in towns and looking around and exploring. Tasks like finding lost amulets, finding a child's teddy bear, finding a letter in a mine, accepting potions from a pretty woman and turning into a pig, figuring out that a family man is a cursed murderer and deciding whether to kill or spare him, freeing a random basement demon, and other average everyday jobs add more to the story and the world and encourage you to explore. There are funny elements to the characters and story that make the world enjoyable as well, such as a dorky joke about piss in the tavern, a guy talking about his dreams and how weird they are when they're all video game references, a fairy tale a child wrote with a neck-breaking plot twist at the end of it, a man in a graveyard who's essentially the personification of shower thoughts, and the medical robot in the bunker calling you radioactive and then 100% healthy. Dana is quite blunt and cold in personality, Alex is grouchy and loudmouthed, Maya is usually more reasonable but tries to keep Alex in line, and Albert is a bit more laid back and straight-laced. They have a few back and forths but overall manage to get on well with each other, and they're all likeable characters. Albert takes a while to have any significance to the story, but he's pretty valuable in combat, so I'm all for him. Speaking of, now we'll delve into the combat. As I said before, it's turn-based, and you have a mix of base attacks, abilities that require MP to perform, and you can defend and items that you can use in battle. As you battle, you level up and gain abilities. At first, Maya has none, but she picks some up, and these are also explained in a fight when you pick them up as you hover over them. Initially, I struggled to understand the turn-based part, as it seemed I had a lot of opportunities to attack, but the enemies didn't. And unlike some turn-based games where your entire team's attacks are assigned one after the other and then all executed one by one, then the enemies attack one by one, this one works off action bars. Basically, if you attack, you have a set time before your action bar refills where you can't attack again. This time is quick, and if you do select attacks really quickly, the game will still let the enemy get their attacks in, so you can't just spam basic attack and attack 3 times in the time the enemy attacks once, for example. This makes the bar seem kind of useless, but it does have some visual purpose later on, which I'll go on to. The enemies also didn't seem to have health bars at first, which is confusing, and I played these combat sections quite quick, so I didn't initially notice that you can see the enemy health bar, but only after you've selected to attack and are choosing which enemy to target. You pick attack or a skill and then choose your target. As you hover on the targets, their health bar shows at the top. This means you can use a weaker attack character to attack a more damaged enemy, and use your stronger power to hit the higher level one if you want. The skills you gain are relevant to your character's abilities. Alex is a fire magician, but as said in the story, can use other powers, so his skills range from fireballs, drinking booze to heal, a vampirism attack that heals him of the damage he causes, to group fire attacks of varying strength, a fire punch that does a hell of a lot of damage, and a group heal ability. Albert is a knight type, so his abilities are based on his blade, such as triple attacks, piercing strikes, a heavy multi-attack, and the ability to self-heal. Dana is more of a magician kind of character with a broad range of magic, from ice magic to strong or weak heals of allies, to stat drops for enemies, to beast rage attacks. Her MP and HP are high, and she's a high level character when you pick her up, which is a huge help. Maya uses a gun mainly and is low on MP, so her abilities are mainly elemental bullets such as a paralysing shot, a stun grenade, a lightning shot, a multi-fire shot that does quite hard damage, stuff like that. Your items help you recover during battle and cover some standard JRPG considerations. You have antidotes to poison, basic and strong healing potions, basic and strong MP recovery potions, status effect removal, phoenix feathers that resurrect anyone who dies in combat with a modicum of health, elixir which fully restores MP and health, and angel feathers which resurrect with a full heal and MP. You don't get a chance to buy these until you reach the first city, so you have to be careful with your battles before this point, and I worried during my many fights initially with the guards that I was going to burn out my stores. In the escape menu, you can use items from your bag to heal and restore MP outside of combat too. Items can be bought from various stores along the way, or can be found in crates, chests, or as loot drops after fights through the game. Your enemies get stronger as the game goes on, some basic enemies being hardier than others, such as the metal drone robots in the bunker basement, but at first they're not too tricky to work through. It actually felt kind of mean watching Maya essentially execute dogs in cold blood repeatedly, like the two of them entered the forest on a crusade to kick puppies, but that sympathy faded fast once the big wolves came out and I had to fight packs of them. Your first enemies though are spiders, and in the spider den was the first time I came across a boss fight. There are several boss fights in the game, and the big spider is a good entry-level boss fight, doing quite hard damage, but on a 2v1 and with some potions it wasn't too difficult. The next boss, however, got its own cutscene, and this was the Abyssal Spawn, also known as the Mechanoid. This one had an interesting mechanic where the hands and body were separate entities and had different abilities. The body could either heal one of the three, itself, the left hand or the right hand, or perform a thunder attack. That action bar I mentioned earlier, well, that came in here, because the body had a slower recharging action bar, meaning it could only attack or heal once every 3 or 4 turns, whereas the hands could act more often to attack. Once you killed the hands, it was just out-damaging the body more than it could heal. The next boss is the werewolf, which doesn't have too much special in terms of mechanics, other than having 2 wolves fight with it and another 2 spawn halfway through the fight if you kill the first 2. After that fight is probably the most annoying boss, a robot that fires quotes at you relentlessly through dialogue, so instead of being able to select your attack or your target, you have to scroll through the dialogue with a couple of clicks before you can get back to your options, distracting you from the fight. It's a pretty strong enemy too, and you don't have to beat it entirely from what I saw, you just whittle it down until it realises how annoying it is and leaves. I can't be too mad though, because the robot is meant to be annoying and your characters even comment on it, and even if you try to ignore the text it spews, having to acknowledge it and break your flow of planning allows it to infringe on you anyway. This boss also brings in paralysis and confusion status effects that pause your action bar so you can't attack, or causes your characters to auto-attack each other, which adds more difficulty to the fight. After that, I robbed a grave and had to fight a skeleton with 6,666 HP, just for irony. The quirk of this boss was that basic attacks did 1 HP damage to it, meaning it had to be beaten entirely with skills that required MP, and I needed a lot of items to cover that. However, it was pretty weak to these attacks, which was alright. Your next boss fight is the centipede snarl in the maze. Again, this boss is a hard hitter, but actually not that damaging. It does some poison damage, but because it only seemed to have single attacks and not group attacks, it could only hit me once every 4 times I hit it. But it also had a continent-sized health bar, so I wasn't too sad. Your final boss fight is of course the Flesh Lizard, the second most annoying boss. Why? Because it has the disgusting puke ability where it spews toxic waste on your entire team and can apply 3 separate status effects at a time to your entire team, including paralysis, confusion, poison, and darkness. And then because your entire team is paralysed, it can then attack again with its bony arm and stun damage your entire team, which also leaves a status effect. This combination of stuns and paralysis led to the boss at one point hitting my team 3 or 4 times in a row because I just couldn't attack, and I genuinely thought it was going to paralyse me to death. The whole fight was a battle of attrition where I had to make sure my team was suitably healed to survive the next waste surfing experience, where they'd all get stunned and have to survive the clacking slap of a bony lizard arm. I also figured out here that Dana has an ability to purge all status effects, though only 1 person at a time, and that didn't matter when I tried to snap someone out of paralysis so they could attack, only for the team to get gooed again before it was my turn, so I couldn't use it. The basic enemies don't have special powers like this. Some of them can do weak poison damage or have some status attached to their attacks, but mostly they just try to outnumber you. This sometimes can be a problem early on, but later you get group magic attacks as you level up, and between Dana and Alex freezer burning them, you can wipe out a crowd fairly quickly. Overall, the combat is quite easy to pick up, and the abilities varied enough that you can play fights however you'd like, testing different skills and being able to heal and handle groups of enemies over time. Some characters are limited by low MP, but with enough items this becomes negligible. The first time I fought the werewolf I got slapped hard because I didn't realise I had an item that could recover MP, and so I used a bunch on the way toward the fight and ended up in it just using basic attacks. I did however realise that you can go back to the town and sleep to regain health and MP even if you've gone out to chase the werewolf down. The other mechanics in the game are puzzle solving and lockpicking. The lockpicking is like a little mini-game where you find lockpicks around and try to take on doors and chests of varying difficulty. You have to press the up arrow and the hand will tap the pin, then when it's at the top you click spacebar. If you get it right, the pin locks in place, if you get it wrong the pick snaps and the pin drops, and possibly another pin drops with it if you've already done one. It's a fairly easy concept, if only because it was very familiar to me. Elder Scrolls Oblivion's lockpicking game is basically the same, but bigger on the screen and with no hand, and in fact the sounds for the lockpicking in Project Fire are actually identical to the ones in Oblivion. It's pretty fair though, and you can buy lockpicks for missions you need them on, so they're not too hard to find. The only thing is that once you leave the city in the airship, you never need the lockpicking mechanic ever again. The puzzle solving comes in various flavours. There's a sneaking puzzle where you break into the house for the wind chart and have to sneak around a guard, who will come looking for you if he hears noise, and you have to hide from him in closets and hold your nerve as he plays on the piano idly, falls asleep on the bed, or stands right in front of the closet you're in and sniffs the house owner's underwear. He also locks you in a cage you break into if he hears you move the door. Then you wait until he just gives up and stands behind a fire before you try and solve the safe-cracking puzzle, by ignoring all of the in-game clues and wasting 10 minutes going through every possible number combination of 3 digits like a rational person until you find the right number, so unexpectedly that it jump scares you. The investigations in the town are some puzzle solving, but mostly just exploration and looking at stuff, and the bulk of the puzzle work comes in the final segment in the maze. Forgive the laggy video, I'll comment on that in a minute. There are multiple puzzles in a row here, from trying to open doors and collecting marks to interpreting symbols and gravestones, inputting commands via symbols to a rock, putting those marks on the correct pedestal depending on an artifact near it, and choosing the correct destination to walk in an endless directional maze depending on the noise the game makes when you walk down a path. Oh, and putting statues on the correct pedestal, which I got right somehow because all I did was put them left to right on pedestals in the order they were in my inventory. The puzzles at the end can be figured out, but they're not the most intuitive. It's hard to connect the symbols with the riddle clue that you get given. There's a book with symbols in that has groups, and if you input those into the stone, they give you different things, from status effects, to a chest, to full healing and MP restoration, to the grave with the boss in it, to a skeleton swarm, depending on what combination you put in. But there's a combination that opens a door that depends on graves and symbols, and honestly it's not very easy to work out, coupled with the fact that the maze is obviously quite long and hard to get through, exacerbated by lag, so trial and error is actually just really difficult and time consuming. So much so that I actually cheated off a Steam guide to progress at this bit. Mostly the puzzles are sound, or I was just too lazy to work them out properly, but the one at the end can sink a lot of your time in trying to figure out what to do next. There are a couple of telegraphs to doors when you open them that help, but other than that you're kind of just left to it. I'm going to comment on the visuals and the music before the flaws. Visually, the game itself is pixel, but the characters are drawn. They're not the most accurate, and the cutscene art is very raw. The backgrounds are nice as painted ones, but more washed out than the more intense character art, but there are multiple expressions for characters, and whilst it's not perfection, it's definitely had effort put in and care. The design of levels is good to immerse you to the atmosphere, there are differing environments and the town is designed well, the characters are all different and have individual icons, and the animated portions are done well enough to make it flow. Some sections, like the airship, are really in detail, and they do a good focus on the environments when you move places for the most part. The enemy design is good, the bosses are interesting, some convoluted and a bit grotesque, but they're all unique, and though the enemies can sometimes just be small and big versions of a wolf, they are also varied too, from robots to cosmic starfish to a literal ghost. The only curveball in the entire game is this shopkeep girl, the only character in the entire game that's drawn as somewhat human-like and not anime. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, because this girl also somehow warps her shop from the city into a random tree church in the endgame maze, but she looks creepy as well. The animations for attacks are really good and impactful in combat as well. In my notes I wrote that the music was extra, and honestly that's as accurate as I can get. The menu music is very simple and unassuming, but goddamn, for a game so raw and in some places crude, the music goes full throttle. Rock tracks for boss fights, really nice piano music for the haunted piano, some music even with lyrics as well. The music goes above and beyond, honestly. Good music can really boost a game. Coupled with the sound effects for attacks, it really makes the fight more immersive than just pressing enter to attack. The sound effects and background music in the towns are good as well, though I would say that some sound effects like the creaking of the airship are excessively loud compared to the others. So, the flaws in the game. There are some visual issues such as obviously the typos, and there was a time I failed a lockpick attempt and they all snapped, but the hand icon wouldn't move from the screen when it went back to letting me control my character, meaning I had to reload to get rid of it. Russian and English text mix in the menus, but all of that is fairly minor. My biggest issue with the game is lag. For some unknown reason, the maze at the end of the game was relentlessly laggy. The section with the church tree was perfectly fine, and the tone maze, but the main maze area absolutely hated running. There were wolves in that part of the maze which, when I first entered, I could see popping in and out of the bushes, but on reloading after a break, the lag started and wouldn't stop, and I couldn't see the wolves appearing. I could hear it, but I couldn't see where they were. This also happened in the city, where I saved the game and reloaded in, and from there I had to suffer lag when I came back into it. No idea why. It didn't break the game experience, but it did slow things down and make the text quite jumpy. Generally though, the game ran as it was meant to, and there weren't many major issues with it. Not really an issue, but an improvement. The game is weirdly linear and yet non-linear at the same time, especially in the city. If you accept the side quests but follow the main quest, you move on to the airship and can no longer go back to the city, so if you miss anything you lose the chance to do it. It would be nice to be able to go back and forth between areas before the final maze and committal to the finale. Some more consistency would have rounded the game as a whole. There was really nice attention to detail in some parts. The guard in the house played different tunes on the piano if he came back to it. Background characters like the cat and the dog in the market were made to be interesting too. There's hints of side lore that you pick up, like an old man in his cabin getting killed by a visiting lodger that's unrelated to the story, but all of it makes the world more immersive. However, there are some things that don't quite fit. If Alex and Maya were seen together but she escaped arrest, why wasn't she wanted too if they know that they operate together? Why was Alex not picked up at the city gate but had to disguise himself inside after a whole day uncovered? Why, when you make your way through the forest, can you not sleep in the bed in the shack that you find to make it daytime? I know there's a dead old dude in there, but still. How come Albert can die in combat when he's supposed to be an unkillable golem? Sure, he could be knocked out, but it counts as a death in the game. And would he not slowly regenerate health through a battle as well, since he can just sleep off damage? There are open ends left on purpose, but it's not the most consistent in some places that aren't intentionally vague. I would have liked to meet Catherine, to have some connection to her before finding out she was dead, so I could get a bit more invested in it. I get the characters can be sad, but there's less impact for me if I haven't even seen the person I'm supposed to be avenging. I would also have liked a little more context behind some of the enemies, especially the final boss, but it posed enough of a challenge anyway. I have talked for way too long, so I am going to summarise. This game was made by what looked like 4 different people from the credits at the end of the game. It's got some crude art and some minor flaws, some lag issues, and I would have liked to have played it in a window that didn't require binoculars, but what it also has is overflowing effort and heart. The devs aren't a massive group, but they've made a game that could be followed into a sequel, and I would like a sequel for this because I got invested in the characters and the world it was building. The plotline is sporadic in setting, but that has purpose in helping show off the facets the game wants to display, between steampunk, fantasy, and sci-fi, and building that overall world and the way they combine together. The combat is easy to pick up and requires thought, planning, and good supplies, as well as watching your HP and MP bars. The enemies are varied, and you can grind if you want, but not much is required. The game switches from mostly combat and exploration, to lockpicking and investigation, to puzzle solving, given mechanic variety across the span. The puzzle solving could do with a few more hints, but in general it can be figured out, though it might take a bit of legwork and a bit of time that some people might not be willing to put in. It's not a visual masterpiece with the 2D pixel and hand-drawn art, but it portrays the story well with what it does, and the music is banging if nothing else. The characters are interesting with likeable personalities, and the dialogue is interesting and fun with a few references. It's raw but has passion, and it took me 7 hours to complete, with some features missed in terms of side content and delving into weapons and armour and stuff, as I used basic weapons and armour for most of the game unless I looted something, so it's pretty meaty for the price as well. I would definitely recommend giving it a go. I would give Project Fire an 8.5 out of 10.